Okay, guys, am I very audible? No issues?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thanks. Just a second here. So, ladies and gentlemen, this house celebrates vulnerability as men. Chair, it is important to understand that the concept of vulnerability always comes off as a very negative one, and that the connotations of the infoscene identity in and of itself confers to that. But we say in this particular debate that vulnerability is simply a concept of others having a role to play in your own life. It is not necessarily of you not being complete, but it's rather of you being only complete with the help of others. It is more like an inward sort of communication mechanism that best applies to show to you that you're not just enough on your own, that you're always important as others are important, and as such, you're only as half of the coin that others could complete the coin. In simple terms, vulnerability is simply a notion that says you're not enough as one, you need others. Why then do we think that this vulnerability concept is very important, especially in the world of men? We say that from the historical perspective, first of all, that vulnerability has been a very important factor. And this is in line with what the info slide tells us about in the concept, say, patriarchy, in the concept of women growing and all that. We think the concept of vulnerability is one that is what to celebrate on four things. And these are like the reasons why we celebrate it. One, we think we celebrate it when it is not ill intended as a result of any bad action. Number two, when it best serves humanity. Number three, when the harm is irrevocable, but also inspirational and motivating, that's in the worst circumstance. And lastly, when it is good for women in and of themselves. Why do we think that this concept of vulnerability has necessarily achieved all these four things, and why do we think it's worth celebrate? First of all, no lie, this was not necessarily ill intended to say by men and as such that it was just to make women weak or something. We think this was more like a factor of natural selection. The fact of the circumstances, then the historical narrative, the fact that women needed to stay home, perhaps take care of the babies, and men needed to go and fight those wars. The fact that it was something not just ill intended by men first gives that a very important aspect as to which you should view it. Secondly, we think it best serves humanity in a sense that it plays a role
Edgar
for
point.
men, but also a role for women. I'll take you, Garang. What are you saying? Lester. Hey guys, am I audible or is it Garang who's a problem? A problem. Okay, yes, yes, David.
Edgar, what is vulnerability? That's what I'm asking. Don't you get me?
Oh, and I didn't hear that, but I had defined it. But vulnerability for this particular debate is just the concept of not being complete. And the real definition of contextual is as per given by the motion. The fact that women feel vulnerable and that someone else should play some part, but also a call to the UN women tasking them that no one can save these women, and so women ought to stand on their own. That exactly is what defines vulnerability in this particular debate. So then, why then do we think that this is the best for both men and women? We think for the women, it best plays into their feminine character, and that's philosophically speaking. But also, we think it's very important that it gives that sort of dominion that men have always been having over years. We think it has been a fair sort of concept because it first of all hasn't necessarily like asked so much from women. That's number B. We think it has given some sort of leadership in the ecosystem of marriages, the ecosystem of existence that would otherwise don't exist if there was no this sort of vulnerability of one party being submissive to the other in different aspects of life. And note that this is not just only one that can be celebrated by men, it can also be celebrated by women as the aspects of life that they have taken control of. One can say in sex, arguably, but also in other sort of instances, one can say in other sort of notions like bringing up a child. There's a privilege that women have necessarily enjoyed in Vera. That is to say, a level of more emotional connection to the kid that men have not necessarily had. So this concept of vulnerability, therefore, is one that has been beneficial truly. Yes, yes, Joseph, I will take you. No, that's not truism. That is just the general perspective. Here we are discussing the pragmatics on how the vulnerability necessarily ought to be celebrated, especially by men, because the imbalance that we view in this debate is one that has been justified. So you can debate and show why that imbalance is not justified or why that imbalance has created more harm than good. That's the debate you can take on. But on my side, I'm showing to you on how that imbalance has been justified, but also has done better. I think that's a more fair ground to debate this motion. We all agree that that imbalance is natural and important, but we can agree to what extent has it been. I mean, we can debate what extent has it been beneficial or important and as such accrue good results. I don't think that's truism. So lastly, we think on the concept of if there was any harm. We think the ability of any harm per se caused to women, that is to say, the lack of the ability to fortify or self-impose in the current society, are harms that have been largely irrevocable, right? To say that there are already increasing spaces on which these women continuously operating, right? But also realistically, the fact that those things that you view as bias can never be taken care away of, because even in workspaces where these women have gotten the stand, all those sort of sexist narratives, etc., still exist in there. And the fact that some women do enjoy them but others do not also gives you another reason as to why, at the worst sort of circumstances, again, this is a notion for us to celebrate. And actually, as it is already being celebrated by even some fewer, maybe or more women in some workspaces. The whole idea here is that this is indeed a vulnerability
PM,
of a
your
thing to
time is
celebrate.
up. PM,
Oh,
your time is up.
didn't we have 7 minutes?
And they are done.
Okay, cool. Hey, your man, let me come.
Okay, let's have the Deputy Prime Minister. I'll only be speaking during the last minutes that the time is not. Sorry, leader of opposition.
Am I audible? Can someone just confirm if I'm being heard?
Yes.
All right, cool. Awesome.
Yes, Garang, go on.
Awesome. So I think from the sketchy info slide and the problematic characterization that Edgar presents, I think it is important that this debate is recharacterized, right? And I'll show you why Edgar's case entirely does not fit into any contextualization, even if in what he said. And I'll begin with that, right? So let's first assume that vulnerability is the idea or the concept of not being complete without the hand of other people. Now, you see, even if that is the concept, the grounds for which that concept should then be celebrated in the context of men, Edgar fails to prove that. Because the few things that Edgar says is that it can be celebrated, and this is a very problematic way of characterizing debates, because even if you attempt to skew the debate to an angle that makes you a bit successful or even sound sane, you still sound quite insane, right? And I'll show you why. One, Edgar says that they will celebrate such a defined vulnerability if it does not, if it is not ill-intended, if it is good for women, and if it is motivating. In no world is celebration of vulnerability actually motivating or good for women, or even not ill-intended. Because in most cases, the people that appeal, that show how vulnerable they are, most likely want to be sympathized with. And this is in itself is a very ill intention, because I don't think anyone should appeal to people's emotions in order to actually acquire the help that they need from people. Then secondly, I don't think a man that is vulnerable, a man that cries at everything that comes to him is a safe space for any woman, even for the strongest. Wait, Edgar, shut up. So even for the for the strongest woman, such a man is not actually a man that is safe for you, and that means he's not essentially good for women, right? And finally, it doesn't motivate anyone, not even for the most vulnerable people. It does not actually motivate them. So what is the debate? The debate is, if men, as men, should vulnerability be celebrated? It looks like, let's first look at what vulnerability is. if you show that you need help in a certain way, if you are angry, if you are hungry, if you are poor, if you are broke, if you are sick, this is what it simply means. Vulnerability show simply means, like, if you think that you are essentially excluded from the society, you are not benefiting from anything the government presents, you're not benefiting for your family, if you are maybe a young one, if your elder brother does not essentially give you anything, you simply should go on the streets crying, showing people how vulnerable you are. Something that, like, what the feminists simply do, because sometimes if they cannot compete on the social ladder, they think the reason why they can't win is because actually men have won and men have essentially excluded them. Something like what blacks do when they think the white man has essentially enslaved them, and that's why they're inherently poor. Or something like the youth do, like when they think that the reason why they can't get jobs is because the government has taken everything and the government is essentially corrupt. So what is vulnerability? Vulnerability is if you get the weakest part of things that happen to you, magnify them and try to make them magnified enough so that you appear like the victim for anyone that can help to actually help you. That is what celebration of vulnerability is. Now, in the context of this debate, it looked like men, if they have any emotional traumas, which is something natural, anybody can have emotions, they should essentially show them. If you are sad, you should essentially let your wife know you're sad, let your neighbor know you're sad, let your friends know you're sad, let your girlfriend know you're sad. That is what showing vulnerability is, and that is what celebrating vulnerability essentially is. Now, here is why it is not good for women, because a woman with a weak man is a woman in a very dangerous place. A man that is weak is the most dangerous man. So what essentially Edgar should have showed us is why men celebrating vulnerability is something that is essentially important, and then this debate should be proved on those grounds. But Edgar fails flat on that. Now, before I show you why, in any case, that does not make sense, I'll take Edgar. Edgar, throw it quickly. Do you want to talk?
Hey, Lester. Hello, audible?
Yes.
Yeah, Lester, it's important to understand and just not make noise.
Yes,
this
you
is
are.
not about the
Bro,
celebration, justification on the ways on throwing parties. This
Edgar,
is on the
I hear
idea of what you and women should pick as a concept of what should a strategy of engagement. Please read the info slide. You will get to understand what my speech was about.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Whatever it is, you had 7 minutes to say it. You failed to say it. Now listen to me. And if your DP would do well, DPM would do well, you would have you would still speak. But now you see, here is why vulnerability as men should not be celebrated from side OO. OO thinks that on principled ground, no one should essentially show they are vulnerable, because principally everyone has their vulnerable sides. Now, the strength of a man or a woman should be valued at how much they deal with their weakest points. That means if you are emotionally down, how you deal with your depression without survival for the fittest will be survived by the most fit. Secondly, man showing vulnerability is something that, you see, man is essentially supposed to be a dependable animal. He's supposed to be someone that people depend on. If you are the most vulnerable in the household, it is essentially unlikely that your wife will depend on you, your sisters will depend on you, not even your parents or anybody in your household will depend on you. Now, if you're supposed to be the most dependable and you are the most vulnerable, we don't think that household will survive. Secondly, in most cases, man exercises leadership. Now, a leader that is vulnerable is the leader that will lead people to the downfall. So in the most critical of cases, when people are under stress, the strongest of leaders will lead their people with vision out of stress to show them that there is hope. But if you show vulnerability, essentially, it means that there is no hope and people should essentially just back down. And that is something we don't trust in a leader. And in this characterized debate, men as leaders cannot essentially be vulnerable animals. That as I conclude, in any debate that celebrates vulnerability, we must show how sustainable it is that the most vulnerable parts of people are essentially celebrated. Okay, I think my time is up. I beg to rest. Thank you. No, sure.
Maybe for purposes of keeping time, I'll be coming in towards the last minute to tell the speaker to summarize such that we can have other speakers coming in. All right, let's have the Deputy Prime Minister.
Hello, Chair. I think Ricky is off the call, so that means I may have to earn man. Is that fine? Eh?
It's okay. It's okay.
Yes, Chair. I'm waiting to guide you.
It's okay. You can go. Hello.
Hello, I can't hear that.
Edgar, what are you saying?
I'm saying that PM,
Then you get
who is Ricky, is not in the debate. So
Chair
that
says
means
you
I
can
may have to
proceed.
earn man. Cool. So, okay. So, Chair, I'll start now. If this was in my old times of debate, I would simply have described Lester's speech as bullshit. It's important for debaters to listen, but most importantly, to follow what the info slide says. In most cases, then that gives the insight that you don't speak the nonsense we just heard. For instance, a debate about celebration cannot be in any way be narrowed down to an issue of optics. Not to mention that OO just tries to draw their own debate because they don't understand the context in which OG presents the debate. For you, what OO's case was precisely, Honorable Speaker, was on just that they do not necessarily accept the concept of showcasing vulnerability. And no one ever debated showcasing vulnerability in this debate. Not the PM, no one in this debate. That would be another debate for another day on whether when you're vulnerable or you should go to the street and show it. You should throw a party and show it. You should throw your tantrums on Twitter. That is another debate. What this debate is about is on whether the vulnerability that the info slide was trying to portray, the vulnerability of women being in that lower class and where someone ought to save them, where they always look up to organs like the UN Women, like the whatever, or all those organs, the global ones that fight for their rights, on whether that's a right course of action for them to do, and whether that is a good thing for men, right? Or whether that state that women are into, the state that you always view them as a minor, was necessarily a good state. That state where women would only do their home duties and as such be vulnerable while men go on and thrive in fields of war, in fields of politics. That's the vulnerability in this debate. What this debate interrogates is whether that situation is one that men should necessarily celebrate, or whether men should celebrate the opposite. That is to say, a world where perhaps women are the ones who are taking dominion, or whether they are all at the equal footing. That's what this debate is about. That's the kind of celebration we're talking about, not throwing parties. We think it was really sad for us to have such a debate, especially an opening from the opening from the opposition. And I think that regard, you now understand why you should regulate all the nonsense that was said, because no one was ever debating the justification whether you should showcase vulnerability or not. But this was about the situation on whether it's one that should be celebrated by men. That is to say, whether men have benefited from it or whether it's something that best necessarily plays into their own interests, and that's what the debate was all about. And I think that was clarified in the speech. So let me proceed. As we were already mentioning in our previous speech, right, we showed you that we celebrate something on those four grounds. One, on if the situation was not necessarily ill-intended, all as a result of one's bad action. And we've shown to you clearly why that imbalance, that is the result of vulnerability to women necessarily, due to the patriarchal system, was not just as a result of ill intention by men themselves, but rather as the making of society. The fact that both women and men participated in choosing that patriarchal narrative, that is to say, that for women to stay at home and entirely take care of kids while women go to war, we think that was a good thing. Secondly, we showed you on how that imbalance, on that sort of vulnerability, necessarily best serves humanity. That is to say, in terms of, say, the quality of needs, but also quality of contribution. Even as to the sexual angle philosophically, the fact that you best appeal as a woman in your best feminine structure within this sort of narrative that we view as vulnerability. And we think men like it that way, right? Because their right obsession to power narratives for them being the leader and etc. This applies when you have someone who follows you, right? We think leadership cannot be enjoyed on the top when you just at an equal footing. That's the alternative that the opposition has necessarily defend, right? But also, you don't think like leadership as a domain becomes more fruitful when you don't necessarily have someone who is necessarily a follower. And that's what this vulnerability has caused. And we think that has done much more better for men. And we think it's something, a concept that we ought to celebrate because that exactly is what, like a result, it has appealed to us. Yes, Lester, I'll take up your eye. Yes, Lester. Okay. So, sadly, we think.
Assuming that now you are characterizing the debate. Yeah, I'm telling you, Edgar. Now, so since you're now characterizing the debate that you failed to characterize, no, I'm giving you a point of information. Do you still want to take it?
Yes, yes, please ask.
Okay, so assume you want to take it. So I'm asking you, since you now characterize the debate, why then should we as men celebrate the vulnerability of women? Why then should men essentially celebrate the vulnerability of women? That's your burden.
So I think Lester, you have. Okay, thank you so much here. I think one, Lester, you have a problem of either English or just understanding, right? Because that's exactly what I'm giving to you. That the fact men celebrate this because it is some sort of an unfair advantage. The fact that it's an advantage, but also unfair in their favor, that gives them and makes their leadership spirit an initial connotation of male emotionally based appeals to that sort of a thing, right? But secondly, because of what they have necessarily used of it, we think that is why men necessarily should celebrate it because it keeps them to the top while not necessarily just serving themselves, but serving the rest of humanity. With that, I think, how many minutes do I have? Am I done?
Done. Actually,
okay.
Into someone else's time. Wow. Let's have the deputy leader of opposition.
Did Calvin come back? I mean, those who said he was going to come. Joseph, if you can guide, I don't know if Calvin is here. I heard he was going to return. I don't know. No. I don't know. I don't know if I even had a teammate. But so I'm just going to proceed from here. So, Chair, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, Chair, the problem with Edgar is that at the very first attempt to characterize the debate, especially in terms of showing us who exactly is vulnerable and who is to celebrate whose vulnerability, he failed flat. Now, when we pointed him to the direction of that characterization, and then that is when he woke up and decided to characterize the debate. There is no problem. So we will take Edgar in both speeches, the first and the second speeches. In other words, in both teams, Team A and Team B. So now, in Team B, Edgar then wakes up and says that, you see, the vulnerability we want to celebrate is the vulnerability of women. The one that essentially shows that women are the ones that need help. There's a whole UN women in place. There's a whole girl, whatever it is, girl child, something, whatever it is. There's a whole hashtag that seems to essentially want to show that women are some people that actually need help. So the debate then resolves in Edgar's speech that as men, we should celebrate that showed vulnerability of women. And then the problem with Edgar then is, and I gave him a chance to answer that. So even if you characterize the debate and say, you see, the reason why the vulnerability you want to celebrate is the one that does not harm women, is the one that is not ill-intended, is the one that is not intentionally, is the one that is motivating. Even if that is what it is, okay, fine. That is the kind of vulnerability that you essentially want to celebrate. But then as you accuse me of failing to listen or essentially not even knowing the kind of English that you speak, the problem with you is you speak to your own head. You don't speak it out. Because when you speak it out, the only time when you spoke about the reason for celebrating the vulnerability, which is your burden in the debate, your burden is not to show us what kind of vulnerability you essentially celebrate. Your burden is to show us why you celebrate that said kind of vulnerability. The first thing you said is the reason why you celebrate it is because there is an unfair advantage that men gain from the vulnerability of women, which is something which becomes the reason why it should be celebrated. Look at the problem. The most illogical thing ever said by, okay, I almost said the smartest because I don't think you are, is that we can celebrate something for being unfairly advantageous. If you concede that the benefits that accrue to man from the vulnerability of women are essentially unfair advantages, then it kills your ability to celebrate that same thing. But that is under the assumption that in the very first place, man accrues any said benefits from the vulnerability of women. Because I don't think there's anything beneficial with having partners that are vulnerable. Let me show you as men why we have suffered because women are vulnerable, and that because of such things, we cannot celebrate them. One, in the from the beginning, you are supposed to take care of your of your sisters because they are your sisters. You're supposed to take care of your girlfriend, and that's why you, Edgar, will have to spend so much in order to date a pretty girl. If you don't do that, of course, I will do it, and that is how I take your girlfriend. So that's why the competition for women is on how much you can take care of the said vulnerable thing you call your girlfriend. That is a burden to men, and that's why we cannot even celebrate that nonsensical vulnerability in the very first place, because that's not a fair advantage. That's not an advantage, let alone being an unfair advantage. Secondly, again, when you marry them and become your wife, the burden of building a roof upon them, taking care of them is still yours. So essentially, women are a burden of man. Even from the history which you attempted in the very first place, it is men that go out to hunt for the woman that remains at home because she's not strong enough to go to outside to actually hunt because she's vulnerable. So I don't think that is something that is an advantage, leave alone being unfair advantage, which is something that you assert. So I don't think as men, if the debate is about celebrating the vulnerability of women, we have reasons enough to celebrate it, because the most burdensome thing society has ever put on men is the responsibility to take care of women. That's essentially bad, because I don't think as men we have a responsibility to take care of other human beings that have essentially been proved vulnerable, like Edgar agrees. So the problem with Edgar is it doesn't share or anybody in this debate what men have benefited from the vulnerability of women apart from being burdens of men. That is something that essentially becomes a reason why we should celebrate these women. So secondly, again, so let's assume that Edgar made a justified case, especially something that he attempted in the very first place, to make it look like vulnerability is entirely a thing that men should celebrate. I said it in my first speech. There is no reason for anyone, woman or man, for any vulnerability. Man's, like I argued in my first speech, woman's, like I'm arguing in the second speech, should not essentially be celebrated because it doesn't accrue benefits to anyone. Edgar asserts that there are unfair advantages to man, but the only thing that has happened to man under this sun, because women are vulnerable, is because they have been given an unfair burden to take care of a very vulnerable being like woman. And that's why hashtags are being pushed for men to put in their money. Absolutely, to take care of women that have been proven vulnerable. We are being asked to take care of them so that they don't get pregnant before they are of age. We are being asked to take care of them when they are pregnant because they want to give birth. I hear we have to share the burden because we are their husbands when they are giving birth. Essentially, if you are not strong enough to take care of your own pregnancy, make the choice not to be pregnant. But even now, under UN women or anybody else, we are being asked to to be more present in the lives of our women because they have been proven vulnerable. That's a burden that we don't think is a reason for us to celebrate the vulnerability of women. Edgar, next time you have a better chance to make a case for your women, because in this debate, I don't think you've done it. Good luck.
I'm sorry, guys. Let's have the closing government. The first member of closing government speaking.
Okay, thank you so much, Pano. I beg to know whether I can be heard.
You are loud enough.
All right, thank you so much. One thing that I get from the submission of Mr. Lester is one. With undue regard to whatever he said, there is one point that he makes, that the worst thing that vulnerability has ever created is the responsibility of men to take care of women. Now, in response to this, I find that if I give it time to respond to it, it will just be a wastage of time, because the whole of my speech is a justification of vulnerability of women. But now I want to look at this in the most important aspect, and that's where our extension shall be. The most important aspect and justification we're giving this is the sexual and emotional vulnerability of women and how beneficial it is to the world. Panel. Therefore, our focus will be will not regard most of the things that have been talked about. Our focus will be, as has been hinted on by the opening government, the sexual and emotional justifiability. Panel. The thing is, a woman who is vulnerable displays, a vulnerable woman displays such vulnerability through submission. And it is obvious and undisputable that vulnerability of women attracts men. Now, this attraction is different from a woman who is self-independent, and as has been portrayed in the society that we're in. The society we're in, we're having high working class women who are single and are not even in any relationships, not to mention marriages. The reason is they have lost the sense of vulnerability as was attached onto them by nature. Now, panel, our submission is, why is it that when you go to the market and you find all these low-class women, all these women who are vulnerable, who are having problems, financial problems, who are having all the kinds of issues that Lester tries to allude to being burdensome, you will find that everyone there is in a relationship. Everyone there is married. However, when you move to offices, none of them is married, none of them is in a relationship. It implies that men choose these women, and now I'm responding to Lester. It implies that men will only go for women who are vulnerable. Vulnerability is an attraction. Without vulnerability, there is no sense of multiplication. Without vulnerability, there is no family. And like has been put forward already, that there cannot be a situation whereby neither of the gender is vulnerable. So by nature, a man has been created, and for those, a man has been created to have, by nature, a man has been created to have that independence of self-sustenance, and the woman has been created to be dependent, and that dependence comes with vulnerability, and that is especially on the financial part and on the part of feeling the security. But now, when we go to the sexual vulnerability, we speak of how the dependence of a woman creates the sexual vulnerability. By nature, the need for man to provide will create attraction to the man to come closer. And just like the very allusion that I have given, that when you go and when you go to a market, you realize that everyone who is in the market is in a relationship or is married. And yet those are people who are having the highest financial problems, the highest social problems, the highest political misunderstanding. But their vulnerability will attract men of different calibers towards them. Please. That is the most attractive thing on a woman, vulnerability. Thank you so much. I have described what the vulnerability looks like. I have spoken of financial need. I have spoken of emotional support. I know one of the most probable things is that when you go to a burial, the grieving family, in most cases, they will get partners at the burial. Why? They're in a sense of vulnerability, especially if they're women. Now, this is the same scenario I am telling you about, that when you go and make a check, you realize that people who are independent, that is women who are independent, and women who are in a high working class, most of them are not in marriages. Why? They have no financial, they have no financial vulnerability. They have no emotional vulnerability, because they know that when they are emotionally vulnerable, they will need to just go and speak to a counselor. So they fail to have that vulnerability, and in any sense they lose attraction to a man. So therefore it defeats reason and understanding for Lester to come and debate and state that vulnerability of women is burdensome to men. I find that disturbing, because if it is burdensome to men, why does it still so happen that women who are vulnerable are the ones who attract men? Women who are vulnerable are the ones who are in stable marriages. Women who are vulnerable are the ones who are happy in marriages.
Mr. Speaker.
And that is, did you say my time is done?
Mr. Speaker, summarize in the next 1 minute.
Thank you. I want to take a POI from Lester if he has, because I was responding so much to his speech.
Okay.
Okay, Lester, you're not there. So the question I'm asking is, if you submit that vulnerability is burdensome to men, why is it that men are highly attracted to women who are vulnerable? I'll leave that question because it has not been answered. I submit.
Okay. Thank you so much. Let's have the first member from the closing opposition speak. You have 7 minutes. Okay. It's okay. All right. Uh, let's have the last member of closing government speak.
Okay, Pano, I'm on the move and I hope I can be heard. Kindly confirm if I can be heard.
Yes, you can.
All right, thank you so much, Pano. Pano, we think that the member of opposition fails to draw a difference between vulnerability and intelligence sufficiency. Pano, intelligence deficiency is what the member of opposition has decided to discuss today. On the contrary, we have decided to discuss vulnerability. A woman who gets so emotional over a particular something like tweet is in a deficiency of intelligence, whereas a woman who is vulnerable towards a man and is there for emotional support is a woman who is vulnerable towards a man. Pano, this is what we're trying to discuss. And failure to understand the difference of the two, we think that you have no room in this debate. But then we shall proceed and take them at their very best. Now, taking them at their very best, I'll repeat our case. Our case was very simple: that a person or a woman who is vulnerable, a woman who is vulnerable is most likely to attract a man. And why is it most likely to attract a man? We give them a very simple analogy that everyone can allude to. The analogy of going to a market and the analogy of going to these big offices. Where do you expect to find married women more? It is most certain that when you go to these big offices, you will not find a person who is having a very stable marriage. Pano, it is the marriage between the head of UN women is one of the most laughable marriages in Uganda. Winnie Chiza, she is a Ugandan. Her marriage is one of the most laughable ones. Why? Because she feels that she is independent and therefore cannot be vulnerable towards the man. And what does that imply? A woman, no wonder their family has only one child. And someone will say that is choice, but I can assure you, Pano, that that cannot be a choice of an African man. But then proceeding to discuss this, we think that the most important thing in today's debate is understanding what vulnerability is. And we think that the opposition has not taken a step in understanding what vulnerability is. We have said vulnerability is dependence. Vulnerability is dependence. And now this vulnerability has not been something that has woken up and been decided upon. Vulnerability is something that has existed since inception. That once a man is in position to give, whether it's financial giving, whether it's emotional support, whatever it is, then that man feels he's in control. And once a man feels in control, then it's much more possible that he will be attracted. And with attraction, there comes marriage and furthermore. Pano, however, what they fail to understand, and that is the opposition, they think that vulnerability is being stupid, is being in a deficiency of intelligence. Pano, we are saying that a woman who is vulnerable is as well in position to make decisions, is as well in a position to become a leader, is as well in position to become a person who takes steps that are important in life and can do whatever they can do. Part of vulnerability is the need for support, whether be it financial, whether be it emotional. And failure to understand this, the line is very thin, Pano, between vulnerability and intelligence deficiency. Now, we think that opposition has failed to draw that line, and now they are discussing the latter. Now, going back to the former, we think that when you're on the former, there is more. When you're relying on the former, there is more reason and there is more reason and more chance for you to attract a sexual partner. And this has been made very clear. I did not want to allude to the speech of the opening government, but now I will. The opening government spoke about something that was pretty pertinent. The opening government spoke about something that was pretty pertinent. And what was this? The thing was that you cannot have a home or a homestead whereby there are two leaders. In a homestead, one has to be vulnerable to the other. And when one is vulnerable to the other, then the mindset of this one is triggered to know that now they are the leader. They are the leader in that they do not have to be emotionally vulnerable to the partner, but the partner has to be emotionally vulnerable to them. And so is everyone within the family. And now creates a situation whereby there is order. And where there is order, there is understanding of where provision comes from. Understanding of where provision comes from creates a no lack of provision. But Pano, where there is independence, each one, where there is independence of each one, Pano, you can agree that there will not be any consensus unless there are any questions. And I want a specific question from Lester. Okay, Pano, Lester seems not to have a question. I will take Joseph. Panel, our case is based on both science and social psychology. The social psychology, we're telling you, go to the society and make a simple survey. Go to the society and make a simple survey. You'll find that within the very society we are in, there is that attraction towards vulnerable women that a man would love to support. Whereas a woman who is independent
Mahad.
financially, please. Oh, Garang, you want
Are
to
you
bless me
taking
with
me?
a POI? I take it in. Yes, yes, yes. Lester, are you there?
If-
Lester, I think I can't hear
yes,
you.
I'm asking you, Mahad. I'm asking you, assuming we agree that vulnerability is that attractiveness in women, why should we as men who are noticed on you as a person?
Pardon, you said why should men? I think I've failed to, I've lost you on that.
I said, why should we, as men who are not essentially attracted to any vulnerable woman, agree with you, the only sole man that is attracted to vulnerable women, and celebrate vulnerability?
No, we got such a notion that is ill-based and not not based on any social experiment or based on any science. Pano, it is a fact that since inception, men have been attracted to vulnerable women because men are attracted to being the leaders. They are the providers. And Pano, for us to come here and discuss and have comedy that there is a man who is not attracted to vulnerable women is just a waste of time. I will not respond to this question. Pano, I will request that please, I will take you. And I think you still do not understand the debate. I drew a very small difference. Yes, I'm winding up. I drew a very small difference. There is a difference between vulnerability and emotional intelligence deficiency. Pano, we are saying vulnerability is not just financial, is not just need for financial support or need for emotional support. Pano, vulnerability is much more than that. And I thought we had done a very good job in describing this. But Pano, we need as well to draw a line between the two that I earlier made. Thank you so much. I need to cross the road.
So as we let our pre-current speaker cross the road, let us have the last speaker from the closing opposition.
Okay, can I confirm that I am audible?
Yes, you are, Madam Speaker.
Okay. For purposes of this debate, I would really like to start by rebattling Mahad and making him understand that his whole case is a problem to the society we are living in, just as it was showed by Joseph in his earlier speech. Now, Mahad comes in and tells us that emotional and sexual vulnerability of women, it draws men closer to these people. Now, another problem that Mahad does not realize is the fact that when you're talking about submission and you're talking about vulnerability in this context, it does not make sense, because why would I submit to you forcefully, and then you, at the end of the day, you call that me being vulnerable? Because probably I want sex from you, because probably at the end of the day, my mental health is at stake. Now, also another problem that Mahad does not realize is that in his context of sexual vulnerability that says probably draws women closer to their men and all that, is that if he talks about from inception and all that. Now we realize that from the beginning of creation, actually, all these things are sexual. Both men and women are actually vulnerable to each other as far as sexual interests are concerned. Now, another thing that Mahad brings on board is a man being attracted to a woman because they have financial vulnerability. Now, Panda, we also show you that this is actually very bad in its sense that the problems we are seeing in the world right now is because of people like with Mahad's ideas, right? And this is not the type of men we want in the society. Pano, another thing is that when you look at the statistics of globally, actually, you find that women are the poorest. And now these are the type of people that Mahad wants, right? The people that are going to reduce the GDP of the whole globe. And at the end of the day, we are going to become beggars to each other. Now, another thing also that we want to bring on board is that when we talk about issues concerning marriage and then the need of support and then the financial support that Mahad clearly comes in to bring on, comes in to support with a lot of confidence that I don't know where he gets from, is that all this actually, when you talk about marriage and all these other things, marriage can as well be sustainable, marriage can as well be stable when both parties realize that there is actually a common ground where all of us can lie. Just as Joseph told you that, you know what, there are marriages out there that are actually stable when the man realizes that the woman needs to be supported, that a woman needs to as well, be given a point, be empowered to that their level of vulnerability is elevated, right? That they are not vulnerable at the end of the day. Now, Mahad comes in and says that this is not the type of marriages that they want. They want a marriage where the man will step on the woman and forcefully call for submission, right? And this is not actually realistic. You find that these are the marriages that are going to, at the end of the day, face a lot of challenges because this woman is going to, there are going to be problems that are going to be seen even in their children, even among the mothers, right? Even in the family. Please rest. Also, another thing is that when we bring in the issue, when we bring in our issue, our extension, we talk to you about the issues of interest of men. When then also part of celebrating this vulnerability as the whole government bench brings in is that they want to feed their ego. That at the end of the day, they're seeing that a woman, this woman is down there and they are dominant over them. And at the end of the day, they're going to feel like, yeah, I'm a man. Yet, in the real sense, they are not man enough to actually empower these people and stay in the same house with people that are actually empowered, right? Now, also another thing is that when we talk about the interest of men and then the protect, please rest, Edgar. And when we talk about the interest of men, when we talk about the issues of offsprings and all that, we realize that no man wants a child that is dense at the end of the day, a child that will as well be nurtured by a woman that is vulnerable, a woman that is going to tell this child that, you know what, now this and this is the way we are supposed to do. And at the end of the day, this child is as well going to reflect the image of that person, right? Now, when we talk when we're talking about all these things, right, at the end of the day, Joseph comes in and tells you that at the end of the day, we need a model that is actually going to bring in equilibrium, right, in the society, that the women as well are empowered so that they are not vulnerable. Still in the same, how do we do this, right? We are going to as well encourage that the men and then the women end up have this conversation as far as vulnerability is concerned, so that they find a common ground where both parties can as well live in the ecosystem, right, without clashes, just like it would be in the world of the government bench, right? And then at the end of the day, we are going to see that there is going to actually be stability in these marriages. And then when we talk about the issue of okay, Edgar, you had a POI.
Yes. First of all, I want to tell you that even an empowered woman can be vulnerable. So the issue of vulnerability is not just that men just want to stay with like some baba goons, right? We tell you that
Thank
it
you
is
so much,
just
Edgar.
attract.
Please stop there. Thank you so much, Edgar. Now you see, when you're talking about the issue of this is why this is why our case actually now makes yours trash, right? Because in our model, we are telling you that at the end of the day, we want to engage these men and women so that they find a common ground where a woman can still be submissive to a man, even at the end of the day, while their vulnerability has been handled. For example, issues like, by the way, at the end of the day, these people, I think the government bench is losing because they are all men. They don't know, they don't understand that at the end of the day, there's something that is called childbearing that actually renders these people vulnerable, right? Now, this is not something that you should celebrate as a man that has sense, right? Because at the end of the day, we don't want a society that is going to be filled with people that are vulnerable. At the end of the day, everyone is begging. At the end of the day, it becomes tiresome, it becomes problematic even to the status quo itself. And you realize that these women that you're calling vulnerable and you want to celebrate them because they are vulnerable, at the end of the day, these are the people that can actually bring in ideas to the families that supplement yours, not necessarily staying or standing on your head. No, just supplement yours, and actually you grow and become a better, right? Not only in your family, but as well in the workplaces and, as a nation, right? And then as well, the idea of Lester comes in and tell you that whether it be a man or a woman that is vulnerable, there is nothing interesting about celebrating a man being vulnerable at the end of the day. And Edgar comes in and brings us in his two speeches when they are confused, right? Now, Pano, at the end of the day, we tell you that when we talk about the issue of vulnerability as far as men are concerned, now, Pano, this is going to be very problematic. Just as the leader of opposition tells you that no one actually wants, no woman wants a man who is going to be vulnerable at the end of the day. And even in the society, now this man is already vulnerable. How is he going to take his probably God-given mandates in the community that he is in, right? When he's already vulnerable, are we going to see a society that is going to collapse at the end of the day because because men we are celebrating that there is something called vulnerability that men are facing, right? Now, at the end of the day, I've never been more proud to oppose.
Hey. So, thank you, our dear debaters. In this case, panelists, what do we say? Because they would exchange handshakes, but now what are they going to exchange? Either way,
They
we
can exchange
appreciate
what?
everyone. In 1 minute, can you exchange words in a polite and good way? Anyway, thank you very much for that. It's been it's been really good. So you give us a few minutes with the judges to hear the verdict of the day. Do we have all the panelists in?
I am right here. Do we have Dante on?
How do you propose that we do the deliberations? Should they give us like 3 minutes and then they join the call back after that?
Okay, it's okay, Sauda. We can discuss on WhatsApp, right? Then we get back here.
All right then.